The day I realized my neighbor had quietly taken 8 feet of my backyard. I stood there for a long minute just staring at a brand new fence that absolutely did not belong where it was. The strange part wasn't that someone built a fence. People build fences all the time. The strange part was that the fence was sitting deep inside my property, and the man who built it was acting like it had always been there. And the moment he shrugged and closed his front door in my face, that was the moment I decided something. If he wanted to pretend that strip of land wasn't mine anymore, then I was going to use it in a way he'd never forget. Now, to understand how this whole thing started, you need to picture the neighborhood. I live in a quiet part of Dayton, Ohio, in a neighborhood that was built sometime in the late 70s. Nothing fancy, just modest houses, wide streets, a lot of old trees, and the kind of place where people wave when they drive by even if they don't know your name. I bought my house 11 years ago, back when I was newly divorced and trying to start over. It wasn't huge, but it had character. White siding, a small wooden porch out front, and the best part, a backyard that was wider than most on the block. The lot sat on a slight corner angle, so the back stretched farther than people expected. And for the entire time I lived there, the backyard had always been open. No fences, just grass and a row of old maple trees running along the back property line like a natural border someone planted decades ago. The previous owner, an older guy named Walter, told me once while we were signing paperwork that he never liked fences. Fences make people think they're enemies, he'd said with a laugh. So the yard stayed open. My yard blended into the yard behind it. The maple trees marked the line, but nobody really thought about it. For 11 years, that worked perfectly. Kids from down the street sometimes chased baseballs across the grass. My dog used to run lazy circles out there in the evenings. In the fall, those maples turned bright red and covered everything in leaves. It felt peaceful. Then last spring the house behind mine sold. The old owner had passed away, and about a month later a young couple moved in. Late 20s maybe, early 30s at most. Their names were Tyler and Ashley. And from the very first week, they were the renovation type. You know the kind. Within days there were trucks outside their place every morning. Roofers, painters, landscapers. The house got new siding, a new roof, new windows, and what looked like about $20,000 worth of landscaping in the span of 2 weeks. At first I figured they were just excited first-time homeowners. I didn't blame them. But then the fence truck showed up. It was a big fencing company van pulling a trailer stacked with fresh cedar panels and metal brackets. I remember watching the crew unload everything while I was drinking coffee at my kitchen window. I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people want privacy fences. The crew worked all day. You could hear the rhythmic thud of post-hole diggers and power drills echoing down the street. By late afternoon, those tall wooden panels started going up one after another. And by sunset, a brand new privacy fence ran across the entire back section of Tyler and Ashley's yard. Except something about it felt off. At first I couldn't explain it. It was just this quiet little feeling in the back of my mind as I stood on my porch looking toward the maple trees. The fence looked closer to my house than it should have been. Now perspective can play tricks on you. Angles change when new structures go up, so I brushed the thought aside that night. But the next morning curiosity got the better of me. I walked out into the backyard with a tape measure. There was a specific spot I knew well, the corner maple tree. When I bought the house, the survey paperwork mentioned that tree because it sat almost exactly on the property line. According to the documents, the distance from my back porch corner to that tree should have been right around 30 feet. So I hooked the tape measure and walked it back toward the new fence. 22 feet. I measured again. 22 feet. I stood there staring at the numbers while the morning wind rustled the maple leaves above me. 8 feet. 8 feet of my yard was now sitting on the other side of their brand new fence. Now maybe it was a mistake. Construction crews make mistakes. Stakes get moved. Measurements get misread. So I walked around to their front door and knocked. Tyler answered. Tall guy. Athletic build. The kind of person who always looks like he just finished a workout. I smiled and kept my tone friendly. Hey man, I said. I think there might be a little issue with that new fence in the back. He tilted his head slightly. What kind of issue? It looks like it might have been built a few feet inside my property line. He didn't look worried. He didn't even look curious. Instead, he leaned casually against the doorframe and said something that would end up shaping everything that came next. Our contractor followed the survey stakes. I nodded slowly. Okay, do you happen to have a copy of the survey? He shook his head. Not on me. Then he added with a quick shrug. But those guys know what they're doing. I glanced past him toward the hallway where I could hear Ashley moving around inside the house. Would you mind double-checking with them before they finish the last section? I asked, just to be safe. He crossed his arms. Well, the job's already paid for. Another shrug. And honestly, the fence looks great where it is. That was the moment the conversation shifted. Not angry, not loud, just dismissive, like the subject wasn't worth the effort. I stood there for another second, letting the silence stretch between us. Then I nodded. All right, I said calmly. I'll look into it. He gave a quick smile. Sounds good. And closed the door. I walked back to my yard, stood near the maple tree again, and looked at that fence cutting across the grass like a line drawn by someone who assumed nobody would question it. That afternoon, I made a phone call. 2 days later, a professional land surveyor named Carl showed up with a tripod, measuring rods, and a clipboard thick with paperwork. And that's when things got very interesting. Carl showed up early that Wednesday morning in a dusty pickup truck that looked like it had been driving around property lines for the last 30 years. Gray beard, sunburned neck, ball cap that said Midwest Survey Services. The kind of guy who didn't say much at first, but clearly knew exactly what he was doing. He stepped out, looked around the yard, and gave a slow nod. Nice lot, he said. Thanks, I replied. Hopefully still mine. He chuckled under his breath like he'd heard that sentence 1,000 times. Carl spent the next 3 hours walking every inch of the property. He set up his tripod, peered through measuring scopes, checked old markers buried in the soil, and referenced county records he had printed out on thick paper. While he worked, I mostly stayed out of the way, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee and pretending not to watch every move he made. About halfway through the process, Tyler stepped out onto his back deck. He leaned against the railing, arms crossed, staring down at Carl like someone watching a mechanic work on a car they were sure didn't need fixing. Ashley joined him a minute later. She whispered something to him, and they both glanced over at me. Nobody waved. Nobody said anything. The tension was quiet, but it was there. Around late morning, Carl walked over toward me, wiping his hands on a rag. Well, he said, I've got your line. My stomach tightened a little. And he pointed toward the fence. You were right. Not close. Not a little. Right. Then he grabbed a bundle of bright orange flags from the truck. Carl started placing them in the ground one by one, moving in a straight line across the back of the yard. Every single flag landed several feet in front of the new fence. When he finished, the line of orange markers sat about 8 feet inside Tyler and Ashley's enclosed yard. Carl stepped back, looked at the line, and nodded. Textbook, he said. I walked out there and just stood for a second taking it in. 8 feet of my land, completely sealed off behind their brand new fence. I asked Carl to send me the official survey documents, and before he left I snapped about a dozen photos showing the flags lined up perfectly along the real property boundary. Then I emailed everything to Tyler. Photos, survey, a short message. Hey Tyler, I had the property surveyed today. Looks like the fence ended up about 8 feet inside my lot. Attached are the measurements. Let me know when you want to talk about moving it. That felt fair, professional, reasonable. 3 days passed. No response. For days. Nothing. A week later, I knocked on their door again. This time Ashley answered. She looked slightly uncomfortable when she saw me. Hey, she said. Hi, I replied. Is Tyler around? She hesitated for a moment, then called over her shoulder. Tyler, it's the neighbor. He walked into the hallway a few seconds later. Same casual expression. Same relaxed posture. I explained what the survey showed and asked if he'd had a chance to look at the email. Oh yeah, he said. That was it. Just oh yeah. So, I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. Look man, he said, moving that fence is going to cost a lot of money. I waited. He continued. The company already finished the job. The posts are set in concrete and everything. Another pause. Then he delivered the sentence that honestly still makes me laugh when I think about it. You still have plenty of yard. I blinked. Are you seriously suggesting I give you 8 feet of my property? He shrugged, like it was the most normal idea in the world. Fences end up a little off sometimes. That was the moment the conversation stopped being a misunderstanding. It became a choice, and he had just made his. I looked at him for a long second. He held the same indifferent expression. Then he gave a little half smile and said, Anyway, we're pretty busy right now. And he closed the door. Just like that. Now I'll admit something. For the rest of that afternoon, I was furious. Not yelling furious. Not break something furious. Just that slow simmering kind of anger that sits quietly in your chest while your brain starts turning over possibilities. I walked out into the yard again and stared at the fence. On the other side of it, Tyler's new landscaping was pristine. Fresh sod, stone edging, a brand new wooden deck attached to the back of their house. They'd spent a fortune making that yard look nice. And 8 feet of my grass was sitting right in the middle of it. That evening, I opened up the county property records online. I pulled up the parcel map, zoomed in, then zoomed in further. And there it was. That narrow strip of land behind their fence, still legally attached to my lot number. Which meant something important. The fence didn't change ownership. The land was still mine. And according to the local ordinances, a property owner had the right to install structures, landscaping, or improvements on their own land, even if access was inconvenient. I leaned back in my chair slowly. An idea started forming. At first, it was just a small thought. Then it started getting bigger and funnier and a little bit poetic. The next morning, I called a landscaping company. The owner's name was Miguel. Great guy. Did a lot of work around our neighborhood. I explained the situation and asked him to come take a look. When he arrived that afternoon, we walked around the side of Tyler's house, where the fence connected to the property line. Miguel studied the orange survey flags still stuck in the ground. Then he looked at the fence panels sitting well behind them. He whistled. Wow, he said. That's not even close. Nope. He rubbed his chin. So what are you thinking? I pointed to the strip of land between the flags and the fence. I want to install something here. He raised an eyebrow. What kind of something? Planter boxes. Planter boxes? Big ones. Miguel smiled slowly. How big? 4 feet tall, I said, and running the entire length of the property line. Now he was starting to understand. And what are we planting in them? I looked back at the fence. Bamboo. Miguel burst out laughing. Oh man, he said. That's evil. Completely legal, though. Very legal. We stood there for another moment imagining it. A thick wall of fast-growing bamboo rising directly inside Tyler's expensive backyard, blocking his view, stealing his sunlight. Right on top of land he had decided wasn't worth returning. Miguel scratched his beard. When do you want to start? Next week. So the following Monday morning, a landscaping truck pulled up in front of my house with a small excavator on a trailer and a bed full of lumber and steel posts. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee just as Miguel and his crew started unloading equipment. And right on schedule, Tyler walked out onto his deck. He leaned over the railing looking confused. Ashley joined him a moment later. From where I stood, I could see both of their faces slowly trying to figure out what was happening. Miguel's crew carried the first steel post into the backyard. Then the excavator started digging holes. But not in my yard. Inside the fence. Directly in the strip of land that technically belonged to me. I could practically feel Tyler's brain trying to process the situation from 30 feet away. It took him about 2 minutes before he finally walked down the deck stairs and headed toward the fence gate. He stepped into the yard where Miguel's crew was working. What's going on? He asked. Miguel looked up calmly. You'll have to ask the property owner. Tyler turned toward me. I walked over slowly. We're installing some posts, I said. For what? A structure on my property. He pointed at the fence behind him. That's my yard. I pointed at the orange survey flag still lined across the grass. That's my land. For the first time since this whole thing started. Tyler didn't have a quick answer. He just stood there staring at the flags, then at the holes being dug along the line. And suddenly the reality of the situation began settling in. The land he had claimed as part of his backyard was about to become something very different. Tyler stood there for a few seconds watching Miguel's crew work, and I could see the gears turning in his head. The excavator had already dug 3 holes, each about 2 feet wide and deep enough that you couldn't see the bottom from where we stood. One of the guys was lowering a thick steel post into the first one, while another guy mixed concrete in a wheelbarrow. Tyler finally looked back at me. You can't just build stuff in my yard, he said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get sarcastic. I just pointed again at the line of bright orange flags. It's not your yard. He glanced at them again. And I could see that moment when someone realizes they might have pushed a situation a little too far, but they're not quite ready to admit it yet. Ashley had walked down from the deck by then. She stood a few steps behind him, arms folded, watching the whole thing with that tight expression people get when they're trying to stay polite, but the stress is starting to leak out. What exactly are you building? She asked. Planters, I said. Tyler frowned. Planters. Yep. Miguel looked up from the hole he was checking and added helpfully. Large ones. The crew continued working like the conversation wasn't even happening. Post number 1 went in. Concrete poured. Then post number 2. Then 3. Tyler watched every second of it. Eventually, he sighed and shook his head. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Then he turned and walked back toward his house. But the work didn't stop. For the next 2 days, Miguel's crew installed 12 heavy steel posts in a perfectly straight line along the survey markers. Each one was sunk deep into concrete, so they weren't going anywhere. By the end of the second day, the posts formed a long frame stretching across the entire 8-foot strip of land. That's when the wooden planter boxes went in. They were solid things. Thick cedar boards, reinforced corners, 4 feet tall and nearly 3 feet wide. When they were finished and filled with soil, they looked less like garden boxes and more like a raised wall running across the property line. Tyler came outside again while the crew was filling the last box with soil. He didn't say anything this time. He just watched. Miguel planted the bamboo that afternoon. Fast-growing, clumping bamboo, the kind landscapers use when someone wants instant privacy. At first, it didn't look like much. Just clusters of green stalks about 4 or 5 feet tall, with thin leaves fluttering in the breeze. Tyler stood on his deck again while it was happening. The whole scene probably looked confusing at that stage. A row of planters. Some plants. Nothing dramatic. But bamboo grows fast. Really fast. And over the next few weeks, those plants began doing exactly what bamboo does best. They shot upward. New stalks appeared almost overnight. The leaves thickened. The green wall became denser day by day. By the middle of the summer, the bamboo was already pushing 7 feet tall. By August, it had passed 8. From my yard, it looked beautiful. A lush, swaying screen of green that rustled softly whenever the wind passed through. From Tyler's deck, it looked like a jungle wall sitting about 6 feet away from his patio furniture. The change to his backyard happened gradually, but once you noticed it, you couldn't unsee it. The sunlight that used to reach his deck in the afternoon started disappearing earlier and earlier. The fancy landscaping he'd installed along the fence line ended up in permanent shade. His once wide-open view across the yards behind us had been replaced with a dense wall of bamboo leaves. Sometimes when I sat on my porch in the evenings, I could hear them talking out there. Not shouting, just frustrated conversations drifting through the air. At one point, I heard Tyler say, "This is insane." Ashley replied quietly, "Well, we did build the fence." That comment hung in the air for a long time. About 3 weeks after the bamboo reached full height, Tyler knocked on my door. I had a feeling that moment was coming. When I opened the door, he looked different than the last time we'd spoken. Less confident. More tired. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He shifted his weight awkwardly. "Can we talk for a minute?" We stepped out onto the porch. He glanced toward the backyard like the bamboo might somehow hear him. "That stuff you planted," he said, "it's kind of ruining the yard." I nodded slowly. "It's on my land." "I know," he said quickly. He ran a hand through his hair. "But it's blocking all the sun. The deck barely gets any light now." I didn't say anything. He continued. "And the plants we put in along the fence are dying." I leaned against the porch railing. "That sounds frustrating." He looked at me for a second, probably trying to figure out whether I was being sarcastic. Then he sighed again. "Look," he said. "Would you consider taking the planters out?" There it was. The question we both knew would eventually arrive. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make the moment uncomfortable. Then I said calmly, "Maybe." His eyes lifted slightly. "Really?" "Sure," I said. "If the fence moves." He stared at me. "You mean, back to the survey line?" "Exactly." Another long pause. He looked out toward the backyard again, probably imagining the cost, the hassle, the call to the fence company. Finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. 2 weeks later, the same fencing company returned. I happened to be in the kitchen when their truck pulled up. I walked outside with my coffee and leaned on the porch railing as the crew started dismantling the fence panel by panel. The posts that had once been sunk proudly into Tyler's new yard were pulled out of the ground one after another. Concrete cracked. Wood lifted. The fence slowly crept backward until it reached the exact line where Carl's orange flags had once stood. It took them almost a full day. By the time they finished, the new fence sat perfectly on the property boundary, exactly where it should have been in the first place. The next morning, Miguel came back with his crew. Removing the planters was a lot faster than installing them. They emptied the soil, lifted the boxes onto the truck, and carefully dug up the bamboo clusters to replant somewhere else. Within a few hours, the 8-foot strip of land was open again. Sunlight poured across Tyler's deck. The shadow disappeared, and my backyard quietly gained back 8 feet of grass that had never stopped belonging to me. Tyler and I still live next to each other. We wave sometimes when we're both outside. We're polite, but we're not friends. And every once in a while when I mow the lawn, I reach the edge of that property line and I can't help glancing at the fence. Perfectly straight, perfectly placed. Exactly 8 feet farther back than where it used to be. Now here's the part I'm curious about. Some of my friends say what I did was justified. That if someone tries to take advantage of you like that, they deserve whatever consequences come their way. Others say the bamboo wall was petty, that I should have handled it differently. So I'm honestly curious what you think. If someone built a fence 8 feet into your property and then shrugged it off like it didn't matter, what would you have done? Would you have fought it the same way? Or would you have taken a different route? Let me know in the comments. I read every one of them. And trust me, neighborhood stories like this always spark some interesting debates. I was out of town for 5 days, just 5, and when I came back, someone had poured a concrete foundation right across my driveway. Not near it, not close to it, right across it, like my home just didn't exist anymore. And the worst part wasn't the concrete. It was the fact that whoever did it thought I'd just live with it. I live on about 7.5 acres out in northern Idaho, the kind of place people move to when they're tired of hearing traffic at night and want to hear wind instead. Tall pines, gravel crunch under your tires, and a long, narrow driveway that curves just enough so you can't see the cabin until you're almost there. That driveway matters more than people realize. It's not just a path. It's access. It's privacy. It's the one way in and out unless you feel like bushwhacking through dense forest and uneven ground. The land's been in my name since 2011, but the driveway goes way further back, late 80s, maybe earlier. It was already there when I bought the place, carved into the land in a way that made sense, hugging the natural slope so rainwater wouldn't wash it out. I've maintained it myself all these years, clearing fallen branches, laying fresh gravel, fixing drainage after storms, not because I enjoy it, but because if I don't, nobody will. For a long time, nobody questioned it either. The property lines were clear, surveyed, documented, quiet understanding between neighbors. Until the lot next to mine sold. They showed up early spring, brand new black SUV, still had the dealership sticker on the back window, city plates, spotless tires that hadn't seen a mile of dirt yet. Their names were Daniel and Elise Harper, moved in from Chicago, and you could tell right away they weren't used to places like this, not in a bad way, just different energy. Cleaner clothes, quicker speech, always on their phones like they were half somewhere else. First time I met Daniel, I was out clearing a downed limb after a windstorm. He pulled up slow, rolled down the window, gave me that polite, slightly forced smile people use when they're trying to be friendly but don't quite know how. "Hey there, you live out here full time?" "Yeah," I said, dragging a branch off the road. "Been here over a decade now." He nodded, looked down the length of my driveway like he was studying it. "That your access road?" "Sure is." He paused a second too long, then said, "Good to know," like he was filing something away. At the time, I didn't think much of it. People ask questions when they're new. That's normal. He waved, drove off, and that was that. Or at least, that's what I thought. 7 weeks later, I came back from a fishing trip up near the Selkirk Range. I'd been off-grid, no signal, just me, a cooler, and a quiet lake. It was the kind of trip that resets your head, makes everything feel simple again. I turned onto my road just before sunset, golden light cutting through the trees, dust kicking up behind my truck, everything exactly the way I left it. Until it wasn't. I slowed down halfway up the driveway because something felt off. Not wrong at first, just unfamiliar. Then I saw it. Concrete. Fresh, pale, unnatural against the dark earth, stretching across the width of my driveway like a barricade. Wooden forms still in place, steel rebar sticking up like ribs, and tire tracks all around it. I stopped the truck, engine still running, just staring at it like my brain needed a few extra seconds to catch up. They had poured a foundation. Not on the side. Not nearby. Right across the only road to my house. I got out, boots crunching on gravel, walked up to it, ran my hand along the edge like somehow that would make it less real. It didn't. Behind the foundation, I could see my cabin through the trees, maybe a couple 100 feet away, completely cut off. That's when the anger started creeping in, slow at first, then all at once. I pulled out my phone, no hesitation, and called Daniel. He picked up on the second ring, calm, almost cheerful. "Hey, what's up? What's up?" I said, looking at the slab in front of me. "You poured a foundation on my driveway. I can't get to my house." There was a pause, not long, but long enough to feel intentional. "Oh, that," he said, like we were talking about a misplaced package. "Yeah, we thought that section was part of our lot." "You thought?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice level. "Daniel, that's my driveway. It's been there for decades. I have the survey." Another pause, shorter this time. "Well," he said, tone shifting just slightly. "Our contractor measured from the road. According to him, we're within our boundaries." I let out a breath, slow, controlled. "You're not. And even if you were, you don't just block someone's only access. That's not how this works." He exhaled, almost like he was tired of the conversation already. "Look, man, you can still get around it. There's open land to the side, right? Just drive through the trees a bit." That's when it hit me. Not confusion, not a mistake. This was convenience. For him. "No," I said, sharper now. "I'm not rerouting my access through the woods because you guessed wrong. You need to fix this." Silence on the line. Then a different voice came through, colder, more deliberate. "If you really think it's your land," he said, "you're welcome to take it up legally." And just like that, the tone of everything changed. I stood there for a second after the call ended, phone still in my hand, looking at that slab of concrete like it had just declared war on me. Because in a way it had. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was stuck outside. I ended up parking near the tree line and hiking in with what I could carry, but because my mind just kept circling the same question. How does someone convince themselves this is okay? Not a fence a few feet over the line, not a mailbox in the wrong spot, a full concrete foundation across the only road to someone's home, and then tell them to just drive through the woods like it's nothing. It wasn't just careless, it felt deliberate, like they had already decided what mattered more. By morning, I was done trying to process it emotionally. That's the thing about living out where I do. You learn pretty quick that feelings don't fix problems, actions do. So I drove into town, dust still caked on my truck, and went straight to a guy named Martin Keller. Marty's been handling land disputes and property law in that county longer than most people have owned their homes. He's not flashy, doesn't do big speeches, but when he looks at something and says it's wrong, you can take that to the bank. He spread my survey out across his desk, adjusted his glasses, and traced the boundary line with his finger real slow, then leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said, almost amused in that dry way of his, "this isn't even close." I raised an eyebrow. "Not even a little?" He shook his head. "That foundation? From what you're telling me, it's sitting fully on your parcel. Not straddling, not overlapping. Fully." I let that sink in for a second, because even though I knew it, hearing it confirmed hit different. "So what now?" Marty folded his hands, calm as ever. "Now we give them a chance to fix their mistake, formally. I'll send a letter. 10 days. Remove the structure, restore access, or we escalate. And if they don't," he gave a small shrug, "then we make it a lot more expensive for them not to." That afternoon, he drafted the letter. It wasn't emotional, wasn't aggressive, just precise. Survey attached, boundaries clearly defined, and a simple demand. Remove the structure within 10 days or face legal action, including potential removal at their expense. We sent it certified. For about a day and a half. I almost convinced myself they'd come to their senses. I mean, once it's in writing, once a lawyer's involved, most people take a step back and rethink things. Pride only goes so far when reality shows up on paper. Then Marty called me. "They responded," he said. "And they've retained counsel out of Seattle, big firm. And they're not acknowledging fault." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable it almost felt scripted. "What are they saying?" "That they relied on their contractor's measurements," he replied, flipping through the documents. "And that any dispute over boundary lines needs to be proven through damages. They're also proposing we negotiate an easement." I leaned forward in my chair. "An easement?" "Yeah," Marty said, calm but with just a hint of disbelief under it. "They want to essentially purchase the right to keep that structure where it is, which would mean your driveway, or at least that portion of it. becomes legally shared or rerouted. I shook my head slowly, letting that land. So they block my access, and then offer to buy it from me. More or less. There was a long pause, not because I didn't know my answer, but because I wanted to be absolutely sure of it. No, I said finally. Not happening. Marty nodded like he expected that. All right, then we file. And just like that, it moved from disagreement to war, the kind that doesn't involve shouting or fists, but paperwork, timelines, and people in suits who bill by the hour. The thing that really got under my skin wasn't even the legal back and forth, it was what they did next. They kept building. While the lawyers were exchanging filings and motions, while everything was technically under dispute, Daniel's crew came back out like nothing had changed. Trucks rolling in early morning, generators humming, the sound of nail guns echoing through the trees. I drove out there one afternoon, parked right up against the edge of what used to be my driveway, and watched them work for a minute, framing going up on top of that foundation, walls taking shape, like they were racing a clock I didn't even know existed. Daniel showed up about 10 minutes later, stepped out of his SUV, sunglasses on, coffee in hand, like it was just another normal day. You really doing this? I asked, nodding toward the structure. He took a sip, unfazed. Doing what? Building on my land while it's in dispute. He tilted his head slightly, like he was explaining something obvious to a kid. My attorney advised me to continue construction until a court orders otherwise. I let out a short breath through my nose. Your attorney also tell you what happens if the court rules against you? He smiled, not friendly this time, more like confidence mixed with a little bit of arrogance. Then we'll deal with it. That answer stuck with me longer than I expected, not the words, but the tone. Like consequences were just another line item, something you sort out later if it becomes necessary. Over the next few weeks, that garage went from a slab to a full structure. Walls up, roof trusses installed, sheathing going on. Every time I drove up to that barrier and had to park short, grab what I needed, and walk the rest of the way in, it felt less like a mistake and more like a statement. Neighbors started noticing too. Out here, word travels quiet but fast. A couple of folks stopped by, asked what was going on. One older guy, Hank, who's lived down the road since before I moved in, just shook his head when I told him. City people, he muttered, not even mean about it, just tired. They think land works like paperwork, like you can just redraw it if it's inconvenient. I didn't argue with him. Part of me wanted to believe that wasn't true, that this was just one bad situation, not a pattern. But every nail they drove into that structure made it harder to hold on to that. 6 weeks after we filed, we finally got a hearing date. Small courtroom, nothing dramatic, wood paneling, a few rows of seats, that faint smell of old paper and polished floors. Daniel and Elise sat across from me with their attorney, sharp suit, confident posture, the kind of guy who talks like he expects to be agreed with. Marty sat beside me, quiet as ever, a folder of documents neatly organized in front of him. When the judge came in, Judge Halvorson, local guy, been on the bench a long time, there wasn't much ceremony. He reviewed the filings, looked over the survey, asked a couple of clarifying questions. At one point, Daniel's attorney tried to argue reliance, that their client had acted in good faith based on contractor measurements, that demolition would cause undue financial harm. The judge listened, nodded, then looked down at the survey again. The boundary line here, he said, tapping the document, is not ambiguous. Silence settled in the room, heavy but calm. He looked up, straight at Daniel. You built a permanent structure on land that does not belong to you, and in doing so, you obstructed the plaintiff's only reasonable access to his residence. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat, first real sign of discomfort I'd seen from him. The judge continued, voice steady. I'm ordering removal of the structure, full removal. You have 14 days to restore the property to its prior condition. Another pause, then he added, if the structure is not removed within that time frame, the plaintiff is authorized to arrange for its removal and recover all associated costs. That was it. No drama, no long speech, just a decision, clear, final, and impossible to misinterpret. As we walked out of that courtroom, Daniel didn't look at me. Not once. Elise kept her eyes forward, jaw tight, like she was holding something back. Marty leaned over slightly as we stepped outside. Now we wait, he said. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like the ground had shifted back under my feet, just a little. 14 days. That's all they had. And I figured, surely, at this point, they'd finally do the smart thing. But I was wrong about that too. 14 days sounds like a long time, until you're the one waiting on it. Then it stretches out in this strange way, where every morning you wake up thinking, maybe today they'll start tearing it down. Maybe today there'll be a crew out there undoing what never should have been done in the first place. But day 1 passed, nothing. Day 3, still nothing. By day 7, I drove out there again, parked at the edge of that same concrete line, and just stood there watching. The garage was fully framed now, roof sheathing on, doors not installed yet, but you could already picture it finished, like they were planning to keep going all the way up until the last possible second, like momentum alone might somehow change the outcome. I called Marty that afternoon. They haven't touched it. He didn't sound surprised. I didn't think they would. So what now? We let the clock run, he said. Then we act. There's something about that kind of patience that's harder than anger. Anger gives you energy, something to push against. Waiting just sits with you, quiet, steady, forcing you to trust a process that feels too slow for something this obvious. Day 14 came and went. No trucks. No workers. No attempt to comply. Just that garage, standing there like a bad decision made permanent. The next morning, day 15, I didn't hesitate. I'd already lined everything up. Tony Ramirez, local contractor, been doing excavation and demo work in the county for years, pulled up just after sunrise with a flatbed and an excavator. You could hear the machine before you saw it, that low diesel rumble rolling through the trees. Marty showed up too, not in a suit this time, just jeans and a jacket, folder in hand. He wasn't there to argue, just to document. We'd already notified the sheriff's office the day before, not because we expected trouble, but because it's better to have things on record when you're about to tear down something that technically belongs to someone else. Even if a judge said you could. Tony stepped out of his truck, looked at the structure, then over at me. That the one? That's the one. He nodded once, like he'd seen enough already. All right, we'll make it quick. There was a moment, right before it started, where everything felt still. No wind, no sound except that idling engine. I remember thinking, this is the part nobody talks about, not the conflict, not the courtroom. This quiet second before something irreversible happens. Then Tony climbed into the excavator, the arm lifted, bucket angled forward, and just like that, it began. The first hit wasn't dramatic, not like in movies. It was controlled, deliberate. The bucket pressed into the side wall, wood groaning under pressure, nails giving way one by one before the whole section buckled inward. Then came the second push, stronger, and the frame collapsed in on itself, roof shifting, beams snapping, dust kicking up into the morning light. It didn't take long after that. Once the structure lost its integrity, everything else followed. Walls came down in sections, roof caved in, plywood splintered, and that clean, sharp outline they'd built so carefully over weeks turned into a pile of debris in under 6 hours. Concrete was the last part. Tony switched attachments, brought in a breaker, and started cracking the slab, each impact sending a dull echo through the ground. Rebar bent and twisted as the pieces broke apart, hauled away chunk by chunk until the line of my driveway started to reappear, rough at first, scarred, but open. By late afternoon it was gone. Not hidden. Not modified. Gone. You could stand at the road again, look straight down that path, and see the curve of the driveway leading back toward the cabin, like it had always been. I didn't realize how much that mattered until it was back. Daniel and Elise showed up about 20 minutes later. Timing like that. I don't know if it was coincidence or if someone called them, but their SUV came in fast, tires kicking up dust, braking hard when they saw what was left. Or what wasn't. Daniel stepped out first, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked shaken. Not angry yet, just stunned, like his brain hadn't caught up with what his eyes were seeing. "What the hell is this?" he said, voice tight. I didn't raise mine. Didn't need to. You had 14 days. That's when the anger hit him. All at once, like a switch flipped. "You destroyed my property," he snapped, stepping forward. "Do you have any idea what that cost?" I reached into my jacket, pulled out a folded copy of the court order, and handed it to him. "Yeah," I said. "I do." He didn't take it at first, just stared at it like it offended him. Then he grabbed it, scanned the page, jaw tightening with every line. "This isn't over," he muttered. Marty stepped in slightly, calm as ever. "No," he said. "It's actually very close to being over." Elise hadn't said anything up to that point. She just stood there, arms crossed, looking at the cleared space where the garage used to be. There was something different in her expression, not anger, not shock, more like realization. Daniel, though, he wasn't there yet. He filed suit about a week later. $18,000, claiming unlawful destruction of property, emotional distress, loss of investment. The whole list. It read less like a legal argument and more like someone trying to rewind reality on paper. Marty handled it the same way he handled everything. Steady, precise, no theatrics. When it came back in front of the court, it didn't take long. The judge reviewed the prior order, the documentation, the timeline, and shut it down almost immediately. Your claim lacks merit, he said plainly. The removal was conducted under court authorization. That was it. Case dismissed. But it didn't end there. The judge ordered Daniel to cover my legal fees, every hour Marty had put in, every filing, every appearance. On top of that, there was an additional amount, $3,400, for damage to the driveway and surrounding trees caused during their construction. You could see it on Daniel's face, not just frustration this time, but something heavier. The kind of look people get when they realize they pushed too far, and there's no way to walk it back. After that, things got quiet. They finished building their house eventually, set back properly this time, well within their boundary lines. We don't talk. Not really. Occasionally a nod if we cross paths, but nothing more. And the driveway? Still there. Same curve. Same gravel. Same stretch of trees catching the light just before sunset. Only difference is now I notice it more. Not because it changed, but because for a while, it was almost taken away. And here's the part one still think about sometimes. Late at night, sitting on that porch, listening to the wind move through the pines. If I had just gone along with it, if I had taken that drive-around suggestion, accepted the inconvenience, avoided the conflict, that garage would still be there. And my driveway probably wouldn't be mine anymore. So I'll ask you this, because I've gone back and forth on it more than once. Was it worth it? All the time, the stress, the money up front, the tension with someone who lives right next door now. Or should I have just let it go and found another way in? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where people land on that. And if you've ever dealt with something like this, I want to hear how you handled it. And if you want more stories like this, real situations, messy ones, the kind that don't have easy answers, hit subscribe. Because out here, things don't always go the way people expect.